we were in more risk-inherent locations, hiking up avalanche chutes and looking for fresh snow. So they're putting themselves in a lot of danger on these avalanche chutes because they just want to be able to have a place to practice and have fun. And these people are innovators, I would say, because innovators are people who have leadership skills, and they have a vision in sight, and they go to accomplish that. So when he says, when I think about some of the places we used to hike it, it's just plain lucky I survived. We started riding in the backcountry before the backcountry became popular, looking for any open face slope we could access. We used to hike like crazy. All right, so they said he went way out of the way to do what he wanted. He's just sort of portraying a lot of passion at this point, and that's important in sport. Grell explained how snowboarders in those days were considered loose cannons on the slopes. People were doing their own things. There were some early competitions, but it seems that the only time snowboarding attracted any attention was when boarders tried to get onto resort slopes and they were turned away. And you could kind of relate this to the Wall Street protesters movement or protest movement, and the fact that the Wall Street protesters, the only time they ever got attention is when they created moments of contention, when they were occupying Zuccotti Park basically illegally. They didn't have a permit to protest, and you need a permit to protest over a certain size. So maybe that might be an indicator of what we need to do. Not saying illegal, but protest to get attention by creating contention. Grell explained how snowboarders in those days were considered loose cannons on the slopes. Right, so I read that. Okay, so I'm sorry, let's continue. Nevertheless, the pieces were falling into place for a sport that would begin coming into its own just a few short years later. Early slalom contests were held in which riders raced through a series of gates similar to skiers. The first U.S. Open in snowboarding was held in Snow Valley, Vermont in 1983 and consisted of a downhill race as well as a slalom run. The first rudimentary half pipe was dug by hand out of a natural snow bowl in Soda Springs, California in 1984, and you'll see that as you're watching the video now. All the while, boards were becoming better technically, and the sport was attracting more and more participants. And it also goes back, I want to re-mention something over here. It says when they were doing early competitions, it says that the only time snowboarding attracted any attention is when boarders tried to get on the resort slopes and were turned away. Well, perhaps there are situations where we can look at how skateboarding and surfing and other sports were faced the same situations. And perhaps we can create those situations, perhaps not. Continuing, Jeff Grell played a major role as a snowboarding burst onto the scene. He recalls riding on the Aspen Highlands in 1983 when the resort opened to snowboarders on a trial basis. So this is just trial at this point. We're not even at this point in Xtreme Ice Skating. We're not on a trial basis. We need to get there. That's what the X-ism business video was about. Was trying to get a large enough market so we can get a trial basis going. And once we can get at least one trial basis, we can sort of go from there. And that's what they did here with snowboarding. Grell explains, that put me in a situation where I had to negotiate the mountain on a board at a resort that previously hadn't allowed snowboarders, he said. I found that the bindings I was using had very little ankle support, making it almost impossible to traverse the slope. So without the proper support, the board won't stay flat when you're going from side to side. There was just a toe strap and a heel strapping when the feet could stay in place, and the rider had to use the muscles on top of his foot to put the pressure on the board. The stress of those muscles were tremendous. So he gets away from the topic a little bit about, he goes from the situation we had to negotiate with the mountain, then he complains about inadequacies of the snowboard. But he picks up again here, and he says that finally some of the big western resorts begin opening their slopes to boarders, and that's great news. I mean, imagine if big You don't even have to say big, just regular ice skating rinks started opening up their public sessions, or devoting their public sessions towards extreme ice skaters. And if you want to add in there freestyle ice skaters too, then great, because you know, the more the merrier in regards to lifestyle sports or any sports done on the ice that are considered non-conventional, that are considered non-conventional, such as figure skating and hockey and speed skating. So that's what we need to do. And if they're already doing this, so they're moving along pretty well. And they say here the smaller resorts waited to see what larger ones would do. But as of 1985, they say only 39 of the 600 resorts areas allowed snowboarding. Only 39. That's a lot. We don't even have one. Once we get 1, 2, 3, then there's a snowball effect. Then we can sort of get where they are now in snowboarding, which was in the year 1985. And Grell goes on to explain, nevertheless, the situation began changing rapidly as more and more resorts saw the economic feasibility of opening slopes and trails to snowboarders. Okay, see this here? I'm going to read this again. I want you guys to remember from the X-ism business video that money is sort of like the end-all be-all of most things, especially when it comes to sport. Money talks. The expression goes, money talks, and people walk. And that was the first scene in the X-ism business video, to become a pillar for our sport, extreme ice skating. And also, I'll include it, freestyle ice skating, to become pillars, or a pillar of the ice rink, to depend on us for money. He says here, nevertheless, the situation began changing rapidly as more and more resorts saw the economic feasibility of opening slopes, the trails, the snowboards. They're saying it right here that the one slope saw that, hey, this guy over here is making money from all these snowboarders being allowed on there. I'm going to try it too. And it all worked successfully. And then the next person, and the next, and the next. And then you get it feeding in on itself. And that's why he says, because before long, rapidly, as more resorts opened, the sports start growing. And then he goes on to say that, Grell goes on to say, it also didn't hurt that the equipment became increasingly user-friendly during the middle and late 1980s. So if this was happening for us, rinks are opening their sessions to us. We got the Xtreme Ice Skate coming out. We're moving in on force, at least in certain particular rinks, and we're letting this be known on the internet by everybody else. And then now, Grell says, now people wanted to see and try snowboarding, could rent boots and a board that were pretty easy to use, much more so than the early equipment that we all had struggled with. And this is an accessibility problem that he's talking about. It just wasn't accessible prior to this. More snowboard shops, so now you got business coming in on this. Opened more board manufacturers. I'm sorry, let me say that again. More snowboard shops opened, and more board manufacturers began springing up. In a nutshell, the sport had become more accessible. And at the same time, the resorts also began to offer instruction. He says, I started teaching at the Aspen Highland in 1987, when they had first Aspen Highland opened up in 85, so it's 2 years later. Okay, so it might give you an indication of how long things take. At this point, it was pretty apparent that snowboarding was here to stay. So he says, when the first teacher there was himself, 1987, many people who wanted to learn started approaching me, he says. So another indicator of sport and how to create sport is that you have to have instructors. And that is why I was pushing it so hard over many years to inspire people to become instructors. And one of the biggest problems in regards to that is that people who want to become instructors, a lot of times that there's not enough people to teach and the market's not big enough at the particular rink. And other times the market's there, but people just don't want to do it. They don't want to go through the whole process. But the process is absolutely required. And at this point in snowboarding, sort of similar, where people were approaching him, you know, he had business going in on this, and he had manufacturers and sport. He says snowboard shops, slopes opening up, and another, and students, and you could pretty much say at this point that the sport is feeding in on itself, and it's taking off. And this is where we need to be. And I'm gonna stop here, and there's another section that says sport grows and diversifies, and I'm gonna read just the first sentence on the next. Once the resorts opened up, there was no holding back the sport. And there you go. So there was a lot of ideas, a lot of things discussed here in regards to how snowboarding started as a sport. But specifically, it wasn't created as a sport. You could see how it started off with a product, then it slowly progressed to a business, and then businesses creating products, the product being the snowboards, improving the snowboards. Then you got people going out and practicing it, and then from there you had these snowboarders saying, okay, now we need a place to practice, we need to open up some resorts. And that's where we are in Xtreme Ice Skating right now. And if you want, and also for Freestyle Ice Skating, we need a place to practice. But from there, after that, once they got places to open one place or two places on a trial basis, then others began, and this is, like I said in the X-ism business video, the same exact thing. That's why I'm going over this, because it's so important that I'm not making this up. I'm using these case studies of what happened in other sports that we can emulate from. The answers are here. They're all right here. We just need to apply them. And after the slopes opened up and they started multiplying, then you had the instructors come in. People just don't want to learn over Skype or over the internet, as we're doing now, or at least I'm trying. People want to learn in person, and that's important. There needs to be a personal aspect to it. Not only that, but it's just when you go to the rink, there just needs to be instructors there so that you can get the business and get people started up, and boom, 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 you're going. And then after that point, their sport started taking off. And if we can get to that point, then the same for us. And that'll be it for this video.